It's in the top 5. And I was very excited about this, so I called my wife in. This is like in the morning in the middle of Kansas, right? And I called my wife in, and I'm like, oh, look, my video's in the top 10. And we're all excited, so we're just hitting refresh, like hoping that it will climb up the chart. And luckily, you can see by 12:08 p.m. there, it actually had risen to the top. And we were lucky. We felt we were really lucky because, by 7 o'clock that night, all the Super Bowl commercials are going to come in and wipe it out. But as you can see, number 2 through 20 were all Super Bowl commercials, and my little video was sitting there on top. It was totally an amazing experience. So this is what you might call user-generated ratings, and most importantly, Google does the same thing. It drives this video to over 7 million views, over 13,000 people commented on it. All of it created by all of us sort of working together, even though we don't hardly know we're working together. This then is an example of a new type of mediascape where the video can sort of travel through this different type of mediascape and demonstrate in the process that all of these applications that we are using are all integrated in really interesting ways. And every time you throw something new in the midst, you throw Twitter in there, you throw something else in there, it changes that mediascape a little bit. And it's just a constant process of trying to understand what's going on. It also connects up with the old mediascape, the old media. So here, after it went big in the new mediascape, it then got picked up by television, went into Wired magazine. It was translated in over 10 languages within a month, just to give you a sense of how this collaborative mediascape can work. Went worldwide after it was translated. And so what becomes interesting about this is at the center of this new mediascape is not just about an information revolution. When you look at this particular information revolution, or it's not a technology revolution either, when you look at this, you can see that at the center of this is us, and that means that this is every bit as much a social revolution or cultural revolution as it is an information revolution. So this is really fun then as an anthropologist because I study people, and therefore it becomes really interesting to look at how all these different things are changing in our world. So I want to bring in some lessons that I've learned from Papua New Guinea, because this is where I actually got the inspiration to study media. I'll give you a little tour of what it looks like in my fieldwork in New Guinea. I go there almost every summer, and I've spent about 2 years there over the last 9 years now. You fly into the center of New Guinea. It takes you about 2 weeks to get here because you have to wait for some little plane that's actually heading that way. You land on a grass airstrip here, and then you walk for a couple days and you end up in villages like this. And obviously there's no electricity, there's no running water, there's no internet. This is this is one of those last places in the world that's really, truly disconnected. And they don't even have any money, so everything is grown locally. It's all subsistence-based gardening and so on. So here's a friend of mine in his garden. They also raise pigs, and you can see sweet potato and taro. This is what a big feast looks like there. They also eat whatever they can find, such as after a big storm, all the spiders fall down from the canopy, from the forest canopy. They'll gather the spiders. Any snakes that they find, of course, they'll eat that. And here you can see this snake. This is actually a turning point in my fieldwork. They found this snake about 100 feet from where I was staying when I first arrived. And I was staying in this house right over here by where those 2 kids are standing. And as you can see in these huts, I'll take you inside the hut. Those are my legs up there in the corner. And that's my little sleeping bag. You can see the red in the corner there. You can see these huts are not exactly airtight. And so when they found this snake, I was really concerned about another snake climbing into bed with me at night or something like that. So I would wrap myself up in my sleeping bag just as tight as I could, and just, I used to call it My Little America. It was like my little sleeping bag. I just wrapped myself up as tight as I could be. And but it was that night, actually. We ate the snake. It was delicious. And then that night, I was all worried about, another snake coming in. And sure enough, in the middle of the night, I wake up, and there's this thing across me that's like this big around. And it's really hot. It's in the tropics. So of course, I've thrown my sleeping bag off, and it's just me and this thing. Like, it's just directly against me. It's like this big around. So I throw it off of me, and I managed to get it pinned down with my left arm. But as I pin it down, I go with it. And I'm wrapped up in this thing somehow. In the middle of the night, I can't see anything. And so I have it down with my left arm, and I'm trying to get my right arm free so I can pin it down with my right arm. And that's when I realized I'd actually pinned down my own right arm like this. And what had happened was my arm had fallen asleep and was across me like this. So, so there was no snake. It was just me wrestling with my arm. And I barely spoke the language, and so then I had to explain to people why I'm rolling around on the ground wrestling with my arm. And all I could hear was, there was only one word I understood at that point, and that was their word for me, which was borrowed from English, and it was white man. And so all I would hear is blah, 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 white man, and then laughter. And this went on for several weeks. And what it did was it forced me to really learn the language. And what was interesting about it is I learned the language, I recognized that my whole identity as a person, like they didn't know anything about me or who I was or what I was doing there. I mean, I must have been the most foreign thing they could imagine there. And there I was. And the only way I could say anything to them was through direct communication. There was no papers I could bring that would explain to them who I was. There was no markers of identity. Even my clothing did not say anything to them about who I was because there was that big of a cultural gap. And so what struck me at that point was that how much media plays a role in even our identity. And so if you look even at their village here, you can see they actually sort of face their houses towards people that they know and that they're related to and so on. And you could actually walk into a village and you could instantly know who is related to who and how, just if you understood how they organized their houses. Now, what's interesting in the last 8 years is how media has changed this. Just in the last 8 years, they've brought in a state-level government that's ran by a local man who has become literate in the last 10 years. And they take GPS coordinates of all the villages, they take census records of the villages, and then they use that information to decide how much funding will go to each of the villages for schools and clinics and things like that. So it becomes very important to look good in the books. And that has completely reshaped the way they live their lives. So the village on top is this same village reconstructed below. And in the one below, if you ask them, why did you reconstruct it this way? And they have one word for the answer, and that's census. And each of the houses here are numbered just like in the census book, so that it basically mimics the census book. They've actually reorganized the way they live based on a book. Here they're actually taking a census, and I actually witnessed some of the first census takings in some of these villages. And what was interesting was that a lot of the people didn't even have a sort of fixed name. They had to invent a name for the census. Because when you know everybody you're ever going to meet in your life, like as you go around, you know everybody because you've met them in the past, you don't need a fixed name. You just go by mother, brother, sister, friend, something like that. You don't need that sort of fixed name. So they had to invent a name right there on the spot. So you can see how it's changing their identity as well. Not only how they're living, but also their sense of self. And then also not only was it this stuff here with the census, but also in terms of disputes, how people were relating to each other and taking care of relationships. When they would get in a fight in the past, they would all meet in the village center and they would talk about it and they would try to heal that relationship. Now they had a written law, and so whenever there was a dispute, the people would have to go inside a closed courthouse and see how they measure up to a written law. Very different than what they were used to. And so the example of all this is just to point out that media are not just tools. You know, a lot of what was happening there was shaped by the media of print itself, its fixed nature, its sort of detached nature, and so on. So media are not just tools, and they're not even just means of communication. They actually mediate relationships, and that not only between people, but also between institutions. And that means that a new form of media really transforms all levels of society. As Marshall McLuhan once said, we shape our tools, and thereafter our tools shape us. So what's interesting about today is how fast media is changing. It's not just about the web coming in, but think about what the web really is. The web is a collection of multiple types of media, and there's almost a new form of media, a new form of relating to one another. Almost certainly one could say every 2 months there's a big one, and every day, if you watch KillerStarters.com, there's maybe 20 new forms of media every day that are started up. So it's like a Flickr here, a Twitter there, and a new way of relating to each other emerges. So now, what does this mean? I'm going to take you inside my classroom. So this is my small class of 200 people. And I've done a lot of surveys with this group to find out what it all means. And here's a really simple one. I asked them how many know the current #1 artist on Billboard's Hot 100. So in the U.S., the Billboard Hot 100 has to do with radio airplay. What's the #1 song that's being played the most on the radio? If you asked people this 10 years ago, everybody would have known. Every 20-year-old would have known the answer to this.